Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Our focus today is on local government, and our guest is Mason Fong, who was recently elected to the Sunnyvale City Council. Mason, thank you for doing the show, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, at the beginning of our shows, we like to ask our guests a bit about themselves and their background so that people viewing the show will understand sort of who you are and what maybe brought you to public life and influenced you in public life. So could you tell us about yourself? Were you from around here, or?
Yeah, so I'm a Bay Area kid, born and raised. I was born in San Mateo. Parents grew up in San Mateo and San Francisco.
I see.
And as a young child, my parents always took me to marches, whether it's protesting the Iraq War or whatever. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it, honestly. But looking back, I'm going to be taking my future kids to those same rallies. But really quickly, my mother was the first planner at the Chinatown Community Development Center in San Francisco. And so she worked on affordable housing. She worked on open space with former Supervisor Bill Maher. My father was one of the first, if not the first, Asian American staff members to the first Asian American supervisor in San Francisco, the Honorable late Gordon Lau. And so they had a very robust background in community organizing and working with elected officials. And so that kind of played a big effect in my life. I went to De Anza College, got really engaged through a Government 1 class that I took, transferred to UC San Diego, realized I hated math or wasn't good at it, so then I switched to urban planning because my mother was a planner. And I realized I loved it. And I got really engaged on my college campus. I joined a nonprofit student organization that organized for Asian Americans. Then took those issues to the student council, got things passed, worked in the community, and then fortunately was offered a job at the San Diego Chamber of Commerce, where then I really got engaged and learned how government worked. Came back to the Bay Area because I really wanted to work with an Asian American population, was fortunate enough to work with one of the trailblazers in the former Congressman Mike Honda, and then be able to work, transition to Congressman Ro Khanna's office to help him take office. And now I work for a San Jose Council-member, Chappie Jones in District 1 in West San Jose.
Oh, it's interesting. That work just sounds a bit like the work your parents were doing in San Francisco.
Yeah. So
did they tell you much about being Chinese American activists and government leaders in San Francisco? Because that has been a dynamic, kind of culminated with Mayor Ed Lee becoming mayor. Recently, sadly, passed away in the past year. But that was something of a civil rights effort, wasn't it, over time?
Yeah. So if you trace back the books, it all started with the I Hotel. It started with ethnic studies at San Francisco State. And it started with Asian American Studies programs, and then it became something more into a movement of how do we represent our communities. And you always had Chinese American family associations, and you still have them in San Francisco Chinatown. But those culminated into a more progressive movement, and you saw organizations like Chinese for Affirmative Action, Chinese Progressive Association pop up, and the Law Caucus and other items. And so eventually we got, Asian Americans just really found out how do we really affect government and how do we really change the lives of our constituencies for the better. And so fortunate enough, my parents always had a background in that, and they really helped me keep in touch with my roots. One of the projects my mother worked on was saving the National Archives, getting funding for that, and that was a 10-year process. She worked with former Congressman Tom Lantos and current Congresswoman Jackie Spears' office to get that done, and now you can actually view your immigration records in San Bruno. Because the federal government was going to cut funding for that, and all those paper documents were going to be lost.
Were those documents relating to immigration for people who came into the West Coast as a point of entry, like into?
I believe it's the entire U.S. I could be mistaken, but so those are very valuable documents. When you look at when Chinese Americans came over in the 1920s, they were 2 years old. My grandfather was 2 years old, and they asked us, how many steps were leading up to your house? How many chickens did you have? And then there were jewelry items that were attached to their file that they never had. And so there was a lot of different items in immigration and customs back then, and different issues that my parents made me very aware of at a young age.
Now, when you say there were jewelry items, were they physical articles, or I mean just lists of things that
no,
were there
physical items that didn't
were
translate,
confiscated or something like that? Or?
Perhaps, yes. And you know, it's similar to Japanese internment. When Japanese members were community members were put in internment camps, then they came back to their homes. The homes may have been burglarized, family jewelry for generations lost, things like that.
Yes.
And so luckily our country has moved a lot since then. But my parents instilled in me those progressive values of knowing where you come from and knowing how far your community has come since then.
So the San Francisco Asian community, and they've had pretty painful experiences. You know, the internment you mentioned, and there were entire parts of the city that were basically taken over by non-Asians, by non-Japanese during the internment. Did your parents talk about the sort of how well Asian communities worked together? Were they, you know, by the time your parents were active, did it seem like there was more broadly an Asian American movement, or were they more involved like in the Chinese American community?
Yeah, so that's the thing with the Asian American community is they don't talk a lot about their successes.
Yeah.
You know, the younger generation, I'm third generation Chinese American, we try to get our parents to write books, and they would refuse.
Right.
But they have all this institutional knowledge.
They're just too modest, do you think, or is what is the refusal from?
It's a cultural thing, being modest, but it's also just a, you know, keep your head down, do great work, and that kind of concept. But you know, if you really trace it back, there's people that were minorities in every sector, and they came together and said, we need a space just so we can hang out, right? And in Silicon Valley, you have Bay Pals, the Bay Area Asian Pacific American Legislative Staffer Group, where it was originally, you know, a handful of legislative staffers for elected officials, and they came together just to have a drink or to have a meal together.
Right.
And now it's something way bigger, and we have representation in almost every elected office. And so that speaks great to Silicon Valley's leadership in the Bay Area.
So what was it like working for you know, an iconic figure like Mike Honda? How did you come to do that, and what was that experience like for you?
So yeah, it was a privilege to serve Congressman Honda. You know, he had 16 years in the legislature. He was on appropriations. He bought he brought $900 million for BART's extension through San Jose. And a figure like him, that was a great responsibility. I managed originally I managed his admin things with casework, helping constituents to get access to their federal benefits, whether it's IRS or immigration or even their veteran benefits. And so representing him in the community was a big task, because, you know, not only was he a big person in stature, but he also had a very great reputation in the community, and so the standards for his staff, I think, were very high. And so I was fortunate enough to be in a machine. You know, his office was one of the best run offices I've ever seen, and it was just, everything was fluid. How you would process events, how you would help constituents get access to their benefits, and so I will forever be able to remember that process.
Right. Well, it sounds like a helpful example and something to aspire to in your public life, to run an office as well as that one. It sounds like it was run. Providing, helping people in constituent service, sounds like that could be a very stressful and also humbling experience. You know, and people bringing their individual concerns and problems to you. What was that experience like for you? Yeah.
So casework is one of, you know, it's social work. It really is, and you have to say, where is the clog in our system? And a lot of times it's not the fault of the agency. They are understaffed, and it's just a loss in translation. You have so many files on their desk, and when I say files, I mean paper files, because a lot of agencies haven't converted to digital files, which is unfortunate.
And when they convert, they scan them into an image, and it's hard to find.
Exactly. So you know, government still has to catch up to modern technology. But you'd have a constituent who was trying to get their PTS benefits from serving in the Vietnam War, exposed to chemicals like Agent Orange, and I had one case where there was an engineer who worked on a vehicle that was exposed to Agent Orange, but he himself did not serve in the area that was described by the VA. And so legislation, you know, moved, and VA amended that scope of that area, and so because those vehicles would travel back and they'd have it on it, and so I helped him to get his benefits. It's a very rewarding experience. Some cases are longer than others, but when you get that email or you get that physical contact from that person, they thank you.
You've really changed their lives or affected their lives.
Yeah, it speaks volumes, and it's not necessarily that it affects that you feel good about doing it, but it's that we were able to accomplish something in government, however small it may seem in the bigger grand scheme of things.
Well, good. And in your current work, can you say a little bit about your current job? And what do you
Yeah,
do?
so I currently work as the Housing and Transportation Policy Analyst to Councilmember Chaffee Jones. Some of the big projects we're working on are innovation in the Westfield area, having an innovation zone where you have small cell deployment, that you have smart tunneling when you dig up the road to put in fiber to make the lights work better. He's also a very big proponent of small businesses, so I'm leading his small business advocacy task force, which advises him on what policy recommendations to change to breaking up big city contracts so that small businesses and local businesses can thrive. And the last one is just, he serves on the BTA board, so transforming the Stevens Creek corridor is a big ticket item for him.
The Stevens Creek corridor in terms of its transportation infrastructure? Or?
Yeah, so VTA is looking at a few different things. They have the big ideas like underground tunneling for rapid transit. They have the smaller ideas like enhanced bike lanes or bus rapid transit, whatever it may be. But that corridor, it connects, 3 cities, Santa Clara, Cupertino, and San Jose, amongst other cities. And so, but those 3 main cities are working in partnership to see, how can we transform that corridor since we have so much clogs on our highways and things like that.
Interesting. And it sounds like working in the position you have now would be, bring good insights and training for the job you're about to take on in Sunnyvale.
Yeah, on the campaign trail, I really felt comfortable with policy. I'd get, Sunnyvale has some of the smartest residents in the county, I believe, and they would ask me.
But you're biased just a little bit.
Yeah, a little biased. but they'd ask me, very in-depth questions about policy, about enhanced bike lanes, about sustainability, about traffic on 101 and interchange corridors. And so this experience, I'm forever thankful to Councilmember Chaffee Jones for providing me with so much responsibility in specifically housing and transit, because I as a 27-year-old newly elected official, I'm wondering, how am I going to stay in the valley and how am I going to afford a permanent home and raise a family? And that's really one of the biggest message on my campaign trail, was trying to get families to say, enough's enough. We need a comprehensive plan, not only in our city, but in the entire region, of how to reach that goal for more home ownership.
Very good. And housing and transportation, those are the issues that often come up for all of us, and especially among young people. And so I'm sure that having the policy insight that you have from your day job in San Jose will be helpful to you as you embark on your work in Sunnyvale. Well, it's been great to get to know you in this first segment, and we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk a bit more about Sunnyvale and your plans and issues you hope to take on in your term as a council member. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Steve Preminger, and I'm a longtime Democratic Party activist. I'd like to urge you to get involved in the Democratic Party. The times, they are perilous. We have a new president who I think is intending to dismantle a lot of the progressive gains that we've gotten as Democrats and as citizens of this country. Give the local Democratic Party a call at 408-445-9500. Help make a difference.
So we're back for our second segment with Sunnyvale Council-member-elect Mason Fong. Mason, before the break, you spoke a little bit about your parents' activism and involvement in government, and it sounds like that led you to some involvement in Asian American activism in college. How do you think that? How did you get started on that? Were you just following your parents' example, or did an issue come up that you felt compelled or called to become engaged in?
So oddly enough, I was dragged to a conference, a student conference. When you're a student at a UC, you actually get certain benefits you don't even know about. You're a member of UC Student Association, whether you like it or not.
I see.
And
now, you say you were dragged. Who dragged? Was it a friend that said you should come to this?
It was just a friend, and they said, you should come to this. And then I was like, okay. And so I went to this conference. Ironically enough, they advocated for prison reform, and I joined on that campaign, and that became the campaign for the UC Student Association for that year. year, and that evolved into a 3-year-long campaign. And now the UCs have divested from prison investments.
Wow.
And so it's very interesting. But that's really how I got involved. Was someone took me to an event, just as many people get involved, and then it's just a cascade effect from there.
Yeah, interesting. And in the local community, I know you've been involved in a number of Democratic clubs. One of them is the Asian Pacific American Democratic Club, which I think is a very well-functioning club. It seems like it focuses on getting some things done. And in addition to yourself, there was another member elected to a local city council. So congratulations to the club for that effort. How did you become involved in the club, and what sort of activities have you engaged in?
Yeah, so I originally went to the dinner where they honored Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. And then I got to know the network, and I said, this is the space I want to be in. Right. And it's one of my favorite spaces in the Democratic Party, other than the Central Committee, obviously.
What makes it a favorite space? What makes it so positive for you?
I think a lot of the members are very progressive members that are actually involved in elected offices. We have staffers from pretty much every office in our club, and we have a long-standing history of being able to pipeline people into public office.
Right.
And so we like we said, we get things done, but not only do we represent the party well, but we try to make sure that whoever's an Asian member that's an elected official has our values, trying to promote Asian American studies at the California level, affirmative action, other policies that our community really values. We try to make sure that anyone we provide an endorsement to really reflects those values.
And so also democratic values as well. And has that been challenging for the club? I mean, there might be, how have you handled the situation, for example, where club members feel a member is strong on Asian American concerns and issues, but maybe not as strong on progressive issues that the club also concerns itself with?
Yeah, so commonly when that might happen is when there's actually not an API that is before us asking for an endorsement. And so I don't want to speak on behalf of the club, but from my personal experience, I think in general, most candidates that come before our door are usually very similar, and it's just a matter of who do we think will value pipelining an API, Asian Pacific Islander, into their district office when they are representing their community. It really comes more down to the mechanics of it than perhaps values, but we reflect the values of our county party, of our state party, pipelining more women into office, making sure that we have progressive people that care about progressive values, things like that.
Locally and on the West Coast, generally, it seems that Asian American population has either sort of transformed or, come to be aligned more with the Democratic Party, or at least as much with the Democratic Party as with the Republican Party. Is that a transition or more of an awakening? Am I right in that perception? And people used to say that Asian Americans were more inclined to be Republicans, and I don't think that's so true around here.
So I think it's a pattern, right? You had people who immigrated in the 1920s, like my grandparents, had kids. Those kids went to Berkeley or wherever, like my parents, and they became very progressive. Right. And then you have in the 1980s, this diaspora of refugees coming over, and they love Reagan, and so they became Republican.
I see.
And even nowadays, you have a huge immigrant population in Santa Clara County, in Silicon Valley, and a lot of them. I was surprised when I was knocking on doors in Sunnyvale. A lot of the Chinese members were Republican. Most of the South Asians were Democrats, and so I'm not really
sort of
sure.
the opposite of what I might have assumed.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and in the Asian American community, we talk a lot about certain issues that are polarizing to our community, whether it's affirmative action, cannabis, education, and we're split in the Asian American population.
Split in terms of people's ideas, or split in terms of people from South Asian countries being different from people from Chinese countries, or maybe the recency of immigration, or that sort of split?
So split in terms of values and party affiliation. Apologies for not clarifying that. So like you'll have a lot of newer Chinese American or Chinese immigrants that haven't been naturalized yet, or just recently got naturalized, and they'll register Republican. And so that's a big conversation that both at the state level and national. When I go to national conferences, is how do we as Democrats make sure that we are at least touching that base before they decide what registration to go, and if they already are registered, how do we perhaps get them to become a Democrat?
Right.
And it's a tough battle, but at least the conversations are happening and people are very aware about it.
The Santa Clara County is, I think, a third, in round numbers speaking, Asian American. And I wonder if your perception is, and if you feel that community's perception is, that Asian Americans have the representation and voice that should be reflected from those numbers, or are we at least moving in a good direction in that regard?
I think we're moving in a great direction, right? I am actually the third Asian American ever elected to the city of Sunnyvale, which has perhaps by the 2020 census maybe a major majority city.
Right.
And Ellen Kamei, another member of the Silicon Valley Asian Pacific American Democratic Club, she's the third Asian American elected to Mountain View.
Right.
So I would say representation-wise, we're moving towards the right area. And I'm a Democrat before everything else, but I think at the county level, we still don't have an Asian American supervisor, right? And that's a big discussion point, because you have certain districts that are actually favoring Asian American candidates, and so we still have a way to go. But I think we have great supervisors and great other elected officials that represent our values. They pipeline Asian Americans into their offices, and so I do want to give them credit because they are representing us just as well as perhaps an Asian American would, and so I really value that.
Yeah, good. Sunnyvale has all this opportunity and all the challenges that Silicon Valley represents. But before we talk about those issues you'll confront as a member of the council, I'm curious as to how you found it to run as a young person for council. How did you convince people to vote for you and not dismiss you as a young person, for example?
Yeah, that was the hardest thing. So you look at me on camera, you might think I'm 19, right? I'm still in college. And so, I think really being smart, it played very well in Sunnyvale, was going to the door, figuring out what issue they really care about. Most of the time it was actually traffic.
Right.
And saying, I have federal and local experience in that, and these are the kinds of things that I want to do. I want to transform our corridors. I want to make sure we put housing where the transit is to reduce impact. I want you to have an urban village center near your shopping center so that you don't have to go all the way across town or to another city to shop. That way it cut through traffic. And I would just knock on a door and I would notice speeding on the street.
Right.
And that's the first thing I would talk about is that. And so to have someone take me seriously is I would break down the issue by saying traffic, and then go into the policies and talk about what I actually want to do and how it's going to get them to their kid faster. Pick their kid up from school. How their 27-year-old, I would see in the voter information that they had a 27-year-old, a 25-year-old. I'd ask them, where do they live? And the answer was always, do they live with you, or they moved to Oklahoma, or they moved to the Midwest? And I'd ask why, right? It's because they couldn't afford a home.
Yes.
And I say, that's why I'm running, because we need someone of your kid's generation to figure out how they're going to be next to grandma, how they're going to be next to their parents. And that way you don't have to fly all the way to the Midwest to see your grandchildren.
So how specific were you? Because I think on city council you'll find the challenge is that as you get so specific as the decision being made about a particular project, that neighbors will be concerned about that project. And as you know from the work that you do and awareness you have of policy, one of the problems we have is just supply. We haven't been building housing in the whole state, and people are coming up with what seem like more and more revolutionary or extreme, depending on how you look at it, ways to try to resolve that imbalance. But what solutions do you favor in general, and how will you handle those specific instances when people have concerns?
Yeah, so I think Sunnyvale's done a great job, right? Since the 2008 recession, you haven't really seen a cut in a lot of the services, and that speaks volumes to our 20-year budgeting process. And in Sunnyvale, we have a great city council where we actually lead in affordable housing and market rate housing creation. And so I think one thing I can help to work on is workforce housing. That's a big thing that I promoted during my campaign, was that we have great groups like Silicon Valley at Home, Housing Trust Silicon Valley that want to help us do that affordable housing and figure out how to finance it.
So workforce housing is a buzzword and is a policy wonk. Not everybody will know what that means. What, in short, what would that be? What would that look like?
Creating housing that either serves directly people that are in teachers, firefighters, law enforcement officers,
who work in the community.
Yeah, but legally you make it so that it targets a median income range where teachers are typically paid, or firefighters are typically paid, and you can actually tweak the marketing so that you can actually reach out to those audiences more, because legally.
So it's about being smart in a legal way, creating an opportunity that you think the folks you hope will be able to take advantage.
But the biggest part is finding the land and then working on the process. And so one big item I want to push in Sunnyvale is that we need more planners. Like every city, we're starving for planners, and so.
Is it because they're hard to hire, or is it like teachers, it's hard for them to afford to live?
It's a very competitive market. There's a lot of building going on in the entire state, but specifically Silicon Valley, and every city's competing against each other for high quality planners, experienced planners that aren't necessarily fresh out of college, which there's nothing wrong with that. But so. I'm an urban planning major myself, and so really what it comes down to is I think Sunnyvale's passed in April 2017 a plan, the land use and transportation element of its general plan, and it speaks to urban village centers. Certain sites in the city that we think if we really increased density there and made it so that that surrounding community would go there rather than across town, we could reduce traffic in the entire city. And so I want to work on that by hiring a new long-range planner, which is something that requires a budget modification.
I see. What about solutions that would take things out of your hands? The state saying if certain things meet certain requirements, the Sunnyvale City Council or Planning Commission doesn't have anything to say about it. Do you favor those kind of solutions, or are you concerned about them, or a little bit of both?
So I'll take words of one of my colleagues on the council. He said, I ran for city council, which means I ran to have local control and represent my community, right? And so that's one of my biggest concerns with the state taking responsibility out of a city's hands is how do we make sure that we reflect the values of that community when it's a state policy that they can pursue. Obviously, you see what's happening in the city of Cupertino. And so if there's a project in Sunnyvale, and I know for a fact that that community needs a new library, or that Sunnyvale Community Services needs a new warehouse because they serve homeless population, how does the state know that? And that's a big question of how do you as a policymaker make that clear.
Well, good luck as you confront those decisions. I know you'll do well and work hard at it, Mason Fong. Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching DTV. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website at www.sccdp.org. Help us to make a difference. We'll see you on the campaign trail.